And the recruiting events for next year is already available. The 2021 spring that able to offer the offline tours, multiple cities, and that's operated by Sunrise, who's where our speaker today from. So quickly, let me introduce Gavin, who's the co-founder and president of Sunrise International. Gavin had currently talked to us over CHE platform. This is second time, perhaps, that Gavin had a 13 years experience in international education in China. And he's got a BA in political science from Columbia University. Gavin sit on multiple boards and international committee of prestigious Chinese university. He's been a frequent speaker in various education conferences, including API and EFSA. And Gavin is an accomplished pianist and also a fluent Mandarin speaker. So, over to you, Gavin.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just need to get the ability to share screen first.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you so much. And we'll begin. Well, it is a pleasure to share with all of you. Thank you for being here today. Today, we're going to go through a couple of different things. We're going to be talking a little bit, about the current situation in China and what we're seeing in the digital community. We'll talk a little bit about websites and different digital platforms, and finally, a little bit about different strategies that you can take to kind of spruce up your content in these trying times. So I first and foremost hope that all of you are safe and doing well at home. A little bit about Sunrise. So Cecilia already basically introduced myself. We've been operating in China for more than 10 years now, based in Beijing, with over 100 colleagues that are specifically dedicated to helping universities recruit in China. In a traditional year, this not being a normal year, we run over 100 offline fairs in 42 cities in China and provide a variety of digital supports. We're very strong and proud partners of CHE. So if anything we talk about today is of interest, please feel free to reach out to Cecilia and her team, and we'd always find exciting ways to work together in the future. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the context of digital engagement. This is, of course, a very strange year with COVID and the political tensions between many different countries in China, whether it's the UK, Australia, Canada, or the United States, all sort of in weird, different political environment brought about by that tension. That being said, the need to recruit international students hasn't changed. And one of the things that we find international recruiters having to do is kind of justify their existence or justify sort of what they're doing in engaging China. And there's a couple of points that we always like to sort of recommend that you could potentially discuss internally or remind your administration. The first is that even amongst all of our polling, while there are a great deal of pull factors that are involved, so for example, an incredible opportunity for international education or a job market overseas, there's a great deal of push factors in China as well. So while there is the Double First Class initiative improving Chinese national university system, most people predict it's going to be at least another 10, if not 15 or 20 years before domestic Chinese higher education is sufficiently caught up that students no longer need to look for study abroad, or study abroad is less appealing. So while that is a little bit something to be thinking about in the future, at least for the foreseeable future, there are still a great deal of number of push factors, whether it's the domestic education system, domestic pollution, or the desire for getting ahead, where that international education is still extremely valuable. And of course, during this time, one of the worst things that can happen for an institution is to stop recruiting altogether. So we do recommend taking a special look at digital strategies this year because they have become increasingly important. Of course, the first thing that we talk about always is the Great Firewall. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it, though the Great Firewall is frequently misrepresented because, in fact, there's only a small number of university websites or websites in general that are completely blocked. In fact, for most universities, it's actually the speed which is being throttled. So it's not a question of whether your site is blocked entirely. It's a question of how quickly a student can access multimedia on your site, if they can access it at all, or how quickly they can load it on a mobile device in a second or third tier city. So one of the first things we always recommend you do is to test it. We're always happy to do a web presence report if you ever need this type of support to just see what the testing, what the open rate is and what the speed is like for your university website across China. This is something we highly recommend that everyone does. And that what you're ultimately likely to find is that localization of that website becomes extremely important. Now, there's many ways you can do this. It can be in the form of localizing a landing page. It can be in the form of creating an entirely separate Chinese version of your site and hosting it domestically in China. It really depends on the university. The one thing that I do recommend almost always, however, is that it is mobile friendly. And this becomes increasingly important in China. It's honestly probably important everywhere around the world, but it's extremely important in China, as over 85% of the people that we engage with are actually accessing university websites by mobile. So here's an example that we created with Northeastern University with a mobile optimized site. You can see two different pages here. Again, localized inside of China for effective access and for speed. Of course, there are other benefits to localization, and the most important, which frequently is forgotten, is the ICP license. The ICP license is critical if you want to be able to have access on Chinese search engines and ultimately run Chinese search engine marketing campaigns. And ICP license, there's a couple of different ways to get it. Of them will always require you to have a local version of your site, whether that be a landing page or a university full-on cloud copy of your university website. So please keep that in mind, particularly if you want to do pay-per-click campaigns on things like Baidu, or even now, if you want to do pay-per-click campaigns on things like Toutiao and frequently even Douyin or a Chinese version of TikTok. So these are just a couple of high-level things that you want to be considering. Of course, in terms of Chinese search engine market share, this has changed drastically over the past couple of years. Baidu is actually increasingly losing market share. There's actually some reports of Baidu market share falling under 50% in large segments of different months, with a rise in Sogou, Shenma, and Haosou, and a couple of others. And so it's interesting to see sort of as this drives down the cost of pay-per-click advertising on search engines. And the reason is because there's increasingly competition. I will say, based on our own campaigns, Baidu campaigns still do end up being the most effective, simply because they still do have a larger market share than the others. But it's important to see how this is actually now driving down the cost of advertising on Baidu, because they have to worry about competitors. So it's sort of interesting to balance it out. Another underutilized, frequently tell people an underutilized tool is when they actually are doing the analysis on the Baidu backend, or the 360 or Shenma or Sogou backend, where you can actually evaluate certain keywords and the frequency of different search items. And so this is almost always something that I recommend people to do, because you can line up your search campaigns directly based on different keywords that are actually trending at the moment. So one of the things to keep in mind is just because a keyword or concept might be trending internationally doesn't mean it's always the same for domestic search engines. So you really want to think about that when crafting your campaign, and seeing what's sort of the trend of the moment in order to capture the highest quality leads for your institution. For search in general, this tends to be most effective either for destination specific. So for example, like study in Victoria or study in a specific region, or most effective for dealing with specific majors. So if you have study mechanical engineering or study machine learning, things along those lines, where it's very, very specific to a certain major. So it works a little bit better for graduate programs. Probably one of the most underutilized resources, I'd say, in the Chinese internet space right now is Zhihu, and what ultimately is a version of Chinese Quora. So with questions asked back and forth, with people able to get slightly more effective reviews or feedback based on certain queries that they might have. And this is something that I do think more universities need to pay attention to, not just because it's an important place to engage with prospective students, but because it's a very powerful tool for actually improving your search engine optimization, your SEO, for your domestic website. And the easiest way to do that is as you're answering questions or as you're engaging with articles or content, you can actually link back to your Chinese domestic website and then slowly, ever so slowly, actually build up the SEO rankings of the site that way. And so it's a highly effective way to kind of grow your community. It doesn't have as many users as, say, WeChat or Weibo or any of the other sort of social media platforms, but it's extremely important when people are actually searching, they will type questions, and it's frequently one of the higher results on a Baidu search. So you can see examples here of like an institution it's that we've worked with called University of Oregon, an American institution that ultimately did do SEO, did take Zhihu seriously, and does have a locally optimized site such that they do get their Chinese website and their content up in the top 4, top 5 results, versus institutions like a University of Southern California that hasn't, and their website, whether English or otherwise, doesn't actually even appear on the first page of the search engine platforms. And so this is where it can be really helpful if you do a little bit of SEO and SDM work, have that localized site, and make sure you are in that top 5 search results so that when parents or students or counselors are looking for you, they can find you. In terms of what those contents or those questions might look like, these can be very, very active sort of questions. Sometimes the people are very far along in the decision-making process. So for example, you can see like, how does it feel to study at Lakehead University? It's an institution in Canada. Or among SUNY, Stony Brook, Binghamton, Syracuse, which school should I pick? Or you see institutions asking direct comparisons, or how do they compare with other institutions? And this is a very interesting opportunity for you to have either your students, your alumni, or yourselves to be very active in engaging that commentary. A couple of things that we also recommend, tone and the content that people are doing is extremely important. So for making sure you are as sympathetic as possible, this is not life as usual in China. Even though they have Corona mostly contained, it's still important to recognize sort of the situation. They are constantly looking for information about visas, situation of Corona, whether or not fall 2021 is going to be normal. And to the extent that you can provide sort of answers to those questions, the more effective you'll be. Other sort of examples that we highly recommend are people that are providing content to support your agent partners or your counselors. And so to make sure that you're providing posts that very effectively answer their questions that you can very easily share with them is something else that we frequently recommend. Talking about social, while first and foremost, let's just take a quick peek at some of the numbers. No real change here in terms of WeChat. WeChat continues to be very dominant. Pretty much everyone with a 1.17 billion monthly active users, MAU. That means that pretty much everyone in China accesses WeChat at some point in a month, every single, and many, frankly, every single day. So WeChat is still dominant, though we are seeing a slight decrease in the amount of page views, traditionally in terms of number of people that are accessing written content. We'll talk about that in a second. Weibo is actually continuing to grow. It's actually from 2013, where it almost died. The platform's very much kind of returned to its own with over 523 active monthly users. And that's actually a very important thing to see. So Weibo is kind of coming a little bit more to the forefront. Douyin, of course, Chinese TikTok has exploded in importance, really bringing short video to the front of the scene, and has in turn become incredibly important to any domestic strategy. So of course, WeChat, it's still maintained its dominance, and I will say it's grown particularly due to USD transactions through e-commerce mini programs. So it has these mini programs which are extremely powerful tools, less so for universities, but extremely important in, for example, the ed tech space, and growing considerably. So a couple of things that are new in WeChat. So we talked about in 2018, 2019, the wow button or the time capsule, which kind of looked like Snapchat stories. But in 2020, we're looking at a couple of different things. I'd say, in my opinion, the most interesting development in WeChat is video accounts. So there are now official video accounts that you can have either affiliated with an existing official account or independently, which are really taking off. It's basically WeChat's response to TikTok, to Douyin. And you're now going to see a consistent theme over everything I say regarding social media platforms, and video becoming very important. So everything we talk about with our university partners now is about optimizing a video content strategy, whether or not that's video going into video going into WeChat, video going to Weibo, or video going to Douyin, or video localized on a website, or video optimized in Toutiao or on Bilibili for other types of campaigns. It's all about video. And so those are, we actually do a whole bunch of different examples of sort of how video content can really be optimized, and we're happy to share those later. They don't share super well through Zoom, but just know that video is going to be at the forefront of your strategy no matter what you're doing. A couple of other aspects of video that have really doubled down is live streaming. Of course, with the pandemic out of knocking people out of physical events, live streaming has just taken off. Mostly when you're integrating with WeChat, it's through Tencent Live, though there are many, many other different live stream platforms that you can leverage as well. WeChat still has maintained its three major account types: subscription accounts, which are mostly used for reading and reviewing content, a little bit less obtrusive. They don't have posting restrictions. Service accounts, which are a little bit more aggressive because they post to people like in normal standard, like an individual message, mostly used for e-commerce services and customer service. Not something we generally recommend for international universities, though they do have the benefit of they can be set up with an international license. So for universities that want to have their account listed under their name, service accounts, unfortunately, are the only ones that are available to you. And then mini programs, which are mostly for e-commerce and other forms of applications inside the WeChat app. We generally recommend people having subscription accounts. Provides a lot more flexibility. However, if you really want to have it registered under university name, takes about 3 months, 3.5 months, and requires you to have a service account, but it does give you that extra little bit of control. So for Weibo, proud to say it is definitely back from the dead in a very big way. We are seeing now over 550 million monthly active users, almost half that on a daily basis. And what that's done is allowed people to really capitalize on some of Weibo's strengths. And so unlike how WeChat is a very, very private, personalized platform, only really allowing people to engage with people who have actively followed you, which makes it a very effective yield tool, but not the best upper funnel tool, Weibo is quite the opposite, with a very public ecosystem with very, very strong tools enabling photos, videos, and immersive 360 content. And so if you're going to look at a platform that's sort of multimedia first, it's definitely Weibo. And as a result, I think they're really thriving in this photo, video sort of world that we live in. And so that's really, really kind of brought them back to the forefront. So we do recommend taking a look at it, especially because it does tend to have a slightly older demographic. So it tends to be less your under 22 demographic. So there's like less students and many, many more parents and people that are sort of counselors and that are a little bit more influential in the decision-making process. Now, I will say they have done a great deal in terms of outreach in order to get more students on the platform, but the students that they do get tend to be in that slightly older age. So it's more tends to be people like 15, 16 through say 25, and you're not getting much younger children, which you might see on a Douyin, for example. Now, Weibo does have its extremely powerful advertising tools, and they have continued to improve. We generally now are only recommending people do what are called 分四通 campaigns, which are campaigns that arrive similar to a pay-per-click campaign, where you actually can get leads or get direct engagement directly on the WeChat platform with a great deal of control over the demographics that you're targeting. So we do ultimately recommend 分四通 campaigns. Weibo does have other campaigns which allow you to boost posts. What we found, however, is the quality of those campaigns, while you get a great deal of impressions, the actual quality of those impressions tends to be very, very low. As opposed to with something like 分四通, which allows for things like giveaways, directly targeting specific categories like education, or targeting trending content, which is under the hot section. So those are different things you can think about. Also, Weibo has incredible diversity by allowing you to have Instagram, what are basically copies of Weibo Instagram stories, they call them Weibo stories, as well as integrating immersive 360 content. So it really is on the cutting edge in that respect and something to watch for. Meanwhile, of course, we would be remiss to not talk about TikTok, or Douyin, Chinese TikTok, both owned by ByteDance inside of China. It has seen explosive growth, 30%. They are on a year over year, getting them basically on par with Weibo, and daily users increasing 62%. So it's incredible the rate of speed of the growth here. And you can see here the percentage of advertising revenue going to ByteDance over time. And there's a great deal of reasons why. It's because it's really evolved beyond its original childish content beginning. It's actually much more mature than the content you'll see on TikTok. You'll see a great deal number of live streamers, educational influencers, and a large number of other citizen journalists, and even government bureaus that are using it for sharing information for mini shows. So it's definitely growing. In fact, it's become so popular during the pandemic that they actually created an entire higher education section. So you can see here the Douyin accounts of Peking University and of Tsinghua University, where they're actually allowing sort of classes to be shared and information that can be shared directly on those platforms. So it is so continuing to grow in the education sector and is really taking it seriously, is a way for teachers to disseminate, particularly when now Chinese students are back in school, but when they were forced to stay remote, it was very powerful with its online classroom distribution. And of course, it does remain very, very popular in the under 25 demographic. So it'll be interesting to kind of watch and see how it gains popularity as that generation gets older. So something to be seriously thinking about. And of course, its pay-per-click cost is the cheapest of any other platform. So they really have undercut many of the others in terms of providing access to inexpensive content. So different strategies that you can take. For WeChat, we generally consider it a lower funnel tool. It's for engaging people that have already followed you, that you've met in person, that you have already your admitted students. It's very powerful for prospective leads, people that you've already engaged with, to provide them additional information, but it's very lower funnel. Upper funnel, you're looking more at Weibo and Douyin. Weibo, where you're having a little bit more of a curated message, and on Douyin, where you're not likely maintaining an account. That's not always necessary to maintain an ongoing account, but instead you can actually directly run advertising on the Douyin platforms through the ByteDance backend, which also allows you to market at Toutiao at the same time. So you can think of it in the easiest way to think of it is probably highest funnel, probably Douyin with paid advertising, mid funnel with Weibo, a little bit of paid advertising and a little bit of curation of that message, and then WeChat mostly as a yield tool. Now, of course, there are other sites that are really gaining steam among the pandemic as well. And one of them is Bilibili. Bilibili is, you can think of it kind of like a Netflix, YouTube hybrid, where you do have shows, but you also have a lot of streamers, people that are actually doing regular live stream shows, which talk about everything. And of course, a large segment of them are educational streamers. It has an entire study from home streaming section with over 20 million users that's all about education and educational content and tutorials. So it's really, really growing. It's a great place to localize video content, as well as a great place to do some targeted advertising on those educational channels. So it does allow you to do some PPC ads, and that's something that we definitely are increasingly recommending people do as they have a stronger video strategy. For searchers, I would say here the biggest difference between Bilibili and say Douyin, you're looking at more spontaneous content, people that are following trending users. On Bilibili, it's more of a search-based, video search-based sort of approach, where people are looking for specific channels, specific shows, and you're more showing advertising inside of those shows, inside of that content, instead of people just doing sort of random exploration or searching for certain keywords. Now, it's interesting also to see how you're seeing a little bit of encroachment by WeChat and Toutiao specifically into the search space. I'd say Toutiao is probably the more aggressive one here, where they're increasingly trying to take over search so that you have sort of notoriously in the past, WeChat's never had a very strong search tool. Its search tools have always actually been very, very weak, but they're now increasingly finding ways to integrate with the online Wikipedias, online knowledge platforms, and of course, just the online databases of content in general. WeChat actually even made an offer to buy out Sogou. It's unclear whether or not to what extent that's going to move forward, which is another one of the search platforms. So you can see the growth between sort of search and social, the merging of search and social, is something that is very interesting, and we'll see sort of how that's covered, because for years in China, search and social have been completely separate. One of the biggest players there is Toutiao, which is increasingly becoming a search-driven platform, though in the beginning it was actually just for sharing interesting news content. So it was basically people looking for the Chinese equivalent of the Associated Press, where large numbers of different articles would be pulled together and sort of curated in a very interesting way. And so people could follow different themes that they like, and it would was slowly using an algorithm identify the types of content that people like to read. And as a result, it made for a very, very powerful marketing tool, because you could, for example, post advertisements, video advertisements directly alongside key themes or trending topics that are directly related to your institution. So if it was like targeting machine learning, you could find people reading about machine learning. If you're targeting a certain region or study abroad in a specific area, you can find people reading articles specifically about that content. And so it really worked well in sort of bringing those interested users together. And again, it tended to have a slightly more sophisticated user base, because it's people looking for news instead of kind of silly dance videos. So examples of sort of articles that were trending up until relatively recently, of course, it's articles about job hunting season, always very important. Students' views on the epidemic and how the pandemic is being handled in different regions of the world, or of course, just general news about institutions in general. So you can imagine sort of having ads being able to be very targeted and curated in a given way. Of course, Zoominars have become more important than ever. However, when dealing in China, we're frequently not using Zoom. We're using either Zhoomu, which is a copycat of Zoom. It looks almost identical, but it is locally hosted, which makes it more stable. As an example, there's other platforms that fall into this category as well, like ClassIn, which is another relatively effective domestic platform. Douyin, of course, in the live streaming space is extremely effective. Tencent Video, another great live streaming platform, and a nice, great place to sort of work as a video repository. Weikaijiang is an example of a WeChat first direct platform. So it's one of the directly integrated WeChat live streaming platforms. So people can actually access the video content when you are able to, with streaming from your computer, they can access it on WeChat, which is highly effective. Now, unfortunately, all of these do require some proficiency with Mandarin, but they can be navigated relatively painlessly and are used for different things. You would use the sort of app-based functions like Zhoomu for some more stable, where stability is most important, because they're downloaded apps. They're most similar to Zoom in that matter. So for example, for admitted student receptions or for classes. You use live streaming for telling interesting stories that are relatively short in nature. And they're really powerful if you're going to do an ongoing sort of live stream, ongoing community engagement. Weikaijiang is at most in platforms that are WeChat integrated tend to be most effective for info sessions. So if you want it to be open to as many people as possible, but you want to integrate it inside of WeChat so you can get a larger audience. Here's a quick example of sort of what that looks like. So you can see like a web-based version here. Here's an example of some Weikaijiang info sessions that we did with NJIT, where you have the user who is interfacing with it internationally on a computer, but then you actually have the, the speaker is interfacing on a computer, but then you have the students who can interface directly from WeChat, which ends up with a very powerful sort of experience. So that tends to be what we recommend there. Finally, we are increasingly recommending people not just take traditional video very seriously. We're recommending people take a very serious look at what are called immersive 360 video content. So this can be purchased with a standard 360 camera, and then you can upload that content to platforms like Campus 360, which then allow you to share that content inside of Weibo, inside of Facebook, inside of whatever platforms it is that you're using. And one of the things that makes that possible is the DIY revolution, basically the ability to do it yourself, to buy a 360 camera like the GoPro or the Insta360 ONE X, and take those incredible 360 panoramas for your digital campaigns. And this is increasingly important. It's something that I think more institutions need to take seriously. It's not very challenging to do. And if this is something that you have any questions about, please do feel free to reach out to us. We're seeing this 360 image content being used to support fairs. We're creating entirely 360 promotional videos that can be embedded inside things like WeChat or Weibo. You can use it for direct emails to students to show them the parts of campus that they're most interested in. And you can use it for self-guided tours powered by augmented reality. I can show you a couple of different examples of that in a little bit, but basically, you can go into, when you have a chance, highly recommend going to campus360.org and just clicking on a couple of different universities to explore, to get an idea of sort of what that experience looks like when institutions can look around, they can engage with specific locations and learn about different types of content, as well as just hear about the university in general, or hear from students that are actually engaged in the live streaming functions of that. They can walk around campus and engage as well. And these types of content can then be ultimately shared inside of your social media platform. So I extremely recommend taking a look at it. This platform in particular, the reason we recommend it is because there is also the Chinese version locally hosted, which is actually 360campus.cn. So there's campus360.org, the global server, 360campus.cn. The 360campus.cn is the domestic Chinese server and allows you to have that really cool location for locally hosting that immersive content. If you have questions about any of this at the end, please do feel free to reach out to Cecilia and the CHE team, and they can direct you to additional information. Perhaps some of the most exciting developments inside of VR is the ability to actually do immersive walkthroughs, similar to what we're doing now, except inside of the virtual experience as well. If you ever want a demo of that, please let us know, where you actually can have a live guide actually walking people through the tour in real life. And so that's something that we're seeing extraordinary growth in. So please let us know if that's ever anything that you would need. Finally, in terms of digital, we're seeing a couple of other interesting, funny little developments in China. There's the Study the Great Nation app, which was released by the party, which has interesting quizzes and allows people to potentially improve their credit. In some state-owned enterprises, it's actually required. You're seeing things like the 4 Generations Challenge, where you have many people taking pictures of 4 generations inside of a specific image, kind of interesting. You see some interesting pushback of different types of campaigns, like the Milk Tea Alliance, which is bringing together Hong Kong, Taiwan, or Thailand, which is kind of funny, or like the Wuhan Jiayo campaign, which was extremely powerful for frontline workers. So finally, some resources and next steps, and we'll dive right into questions. We highly recommend you join our LinkedIn group. It's Chinese Education and International Engagement. That's something that you can find on LinkedIn. We always have information there. You can always reach us by partnering, reaching out to CHE. We can always discuss sort of what might be interesting ways to engage in the future. If you want to participate in offline or online events in the near future, you can reach out to Cecilia for an upcoming schedule of events. We always have a lot of interesting things happening. And if you have questions about 360 imaging, immersive video content, anything like that as well, please do reach out. So anyway, with that, thank you very much. We'll dive into any questions that you might have. And it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Gavin. All right, I'll start the first one. I saw there's one question post there. But the one thing I've heard fairly regularly about universities using WeChat account as a recruiting tool. And many of them are not reaching the expected goal. So are they using the wrong tour, or have they done something that incorrectly? What's your comment on that?
Yeah, so it is, I think, especially when people are used to using Facebook or Twitter, when they all of a sudden start using something like WeChat, they're wondering, why am I only getting like a couple thousand followers on my account? Or why do I only have a couple hundred views on my posts? And the reason is, for as far as recruitment's concerned, in terms of digital marketing, yes, they are using probably the wrong tool. WeChat is a lower funnel. So we think about digital recruitment as a funnel, where top of the funnel is for meeting strangers, people that you haven't engaged before. That's where you can do it most effectively on things like Toutiao or Douyin, in-person events, marketing on Weibo, targeted videos on things like Bilibili or Tencent Video. There's many different approaches. Those are all at the top of the funnel. As you move down in the funnel, you're looking closer to things like Weibo, and at the very bottom of that funnel, you're looking at WeChat. And the reason is because of the level of commitment required by a user to follow you. They have to actively follow your account. They have to be actively shared your account in order for you to engage them. And paid advertising tools on WeChat are notoriously bad. And the reason why they do that is because they're actually protecting their users, because they know so many people are using WeChat for personal functions. We're using it to talk to our parents. We're using it to talk to our friends. We're using it to pay for things. So as a result, it's a relatively private experience. And so what we tell people is use WeChat, recognize that it's not at the top of the funnel, you're using other platforms. At the bottom of the funnel, you should cherish those users, treat them very, very well, because ultimately they're the ones that are much closer to the decision-making process. They're much closer to deciding to attend your university. But if your administration is expecting to see like Facebook style numbers or even Weibo style numbers on a WeChat platform, they're always going to be disappointed. Those are always going to be the lowest numbers, because it's going to be the people who have already made the commitment to learn more about your school and continue staying involved and interested in your school.
Mm. So would you say that if a university hasn't got, say, a large alumni base and is relatively less known, they shouldn't use WeChat as...
So what I recommend for schools like that, I think that's a great question. I actually don't think WeChat should be people's first platform. Or if they get it, they should spend an itty bitty, like as little money on WeChat as possible, just to have the account exist, but not spend. It's amazing how many people, how many institutions will spend a large amount of money on WeChat and ultimately not get that many followers, because so they're spending all this money and time creating content that people don't see. And so instead of people doing that, I recommend, if you have a limited budget and a smaller school, or you're new to China and you're just getting started, it really comes down to you can have a very, very small WeChat presence, posting not very frequently, but then make sure you're investing your budget resources where people can find you. People can't find you on WeChat. They can find you on other platforms. So you drive your resources into campaigns, which then can go to a WeChat account where you actually can focus on yield and converting those into matriculating students. And so that's what we mean by sort of down funnel strategy. So yes, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but for smaller institutions or new institutions or institutions with small budgets, we don't actually generally recommend starting or investing too heavily in WeChat, because they can very quickly be disappointed.
Mm. So where would you suggest them to invest to?
So generally, we would recommend, if you're doing paid advertising campaigns, we would be looking at, I honestly think the easiest place to start is running campaigns on ByteDance through Toutiao and TikTok, Douyin. Specifically because they can lead directly to lead transfer. You can actually like run a campaign and go home with 50, 100, 200 high quality student leads for not an incredible, for the equivalent of a couple thousand US$. So it's not as bad. Whereas, for example, you could spend that same amount of money just developing a WeChat account that has no followers. And so it depends. If you have limited resources, I actually generally recommend going to campaigns first. And then as you grow and get more engagement, looking at maybe a Weibo, because you can have a little bit of both. Weibo allows you to have a more curation of your message, as well as running campaigns. And finally, WeChat, where you actually can focus on yield, right? Where you're going to have the lowest amount of followers, as it's the farthest point down on the funnel. Now, the one exception to this rule is if you are actively meeting people in person. So if you have a very strong in-person engagement plan in China, you're attending a lot of fairs, you're doing a large number of presentations, you have an active alumni base, in those situations where you're meeting people in person, or people are meeting in person, having that WeChat account is extremely important, because it's a great way to sort of share information, and people will scan that account in person, much more likely than they are, for example, to follow you on Douyin, or much more likely than they are to follow you on Weibo. So as a result, if you do have an incredibly powerful offline experience or offline recruitment strategy, then sometimes that changes. But otherwise, we recommend looking at WeChat mostly as a yield tool.
Okay, thank you. And for schools or universities recruiting undergraduate or master level students, would you say they should consider the channel fairly differently?
Yes, I would. So I think for graduate students, there's a couple of things. I recommend search a little bit more frequently. So I don't generally recommend using search engine advertising for undergraduate students, simply because it's too hard to target unless you're in a very specific region or you have something very unique about your institution. So for example, some institutions in like aviation, where they can offer maybe a flying license. Okay, then it might make sense to use search engine marketing, because you can target a very specific type of student. But if you're looking for sort of your generalized undergraduate experience, where you don't know what the students' majors are going to be as clearly, then I tend to recommend more moving towards campaigns that target counselors, that target parents, that are a little bit more aggressive on things like ByteDance through Toutiao or Douyin or even Weibo. For a graduate, where you can target majors, specific interests in specific majors, I think the two most powerful tools are probably Baidu and Toutiao. And Toutiao, you can target people who are looking for specific types of articles. On Baidu, you can target people based on certain majors that they're searching for, where it becomes much more important for graduate study, as well as probably on Weibo as well, because you're looking at a slightly older demographic and target those people there as well. For graduate also, we tend to recommend campaigns that are employment-based. You can actually look for people who are looking for careers in certain different directions. And so it's a very powerful way where you can seed knowledge boards where people are like saying things like, I want to be a mechanical engineer, what should I do? Or I want to be a something, like, what should I do? Or how should I prepare? And it's a great way for people to kind of seed those conversations with the right graduate degrees. So for undergraduate, you're looking at a more school-centric, slightly more generalized campaign with high-quality video assets. For the graduate, more that major-specific, employment-specific, knowledge platform-specific search campaigns, or campaigns that allow you to target by those interests on things like Toutiao or Weibo. So hopefully that helps.
Yep, certainly. You mentioned campaigns a lot. Can you, I know it's always hard for you to give perhaps a budget range when you don't know the institution's needs, but can you give us like just some ballpark figure? Or
yeah, absolutely. So generally on any of these platforms, China is actually a little bit different than many other countries, like many other platforms globally. On things like Facebook or Google, you just kind of specify a budget and you're good. In China, they have adopted more of a model where there's a minimum spend limit. Those minimum spends on any given platform tend to roughly be something like 2,500 to 3,000 US dollars, roughly 20,000 RMB or so. So that tends to be sort of the minimum viable campaign on something like a Toutiao or a TikTok or a Weibo or a search engine. So you should probably budget something like 20,000 RMB, 30,000 RMB per platform if you want to be relatively serious, which means that for a relatively like an entry level search campaign, you're looking at likely something around 70,000 RMB, which is roughly 10,000 US dollars or so, and kind of hovering around that range, depending, of course, on your currency. I mean, the exchange rates are constantly fluctuating. So, but that gives you hopefully a general idea of what those might be. That being said, larger institutions are spending anywhere between 150 to 250,000 US dollars a year on search. You have smaller institutions that tend to spend anywhere between 15 to 30,000 US dollars a year in various forms of digital campaigns, and it can be extremely effective for just driving leads. I think people have underestimated the power there because they're so used to using sort of Facebook and Google. They kind of overly feel that they sort of underestimate the power of some of the digital platforms. I'd also say part of the problem is China, I'd say 5-6 years ago, was just really terrible in terms of the amount of fraud in those campaigns. There were just so many fake leads, so much fake content. And I'd say that's still partially an issue. So we almost always tell people that, like, even now, I'd say the highest quality leads tend to come from ByteDance with Toutiao and Douyin in terms of value per dollar spent. Even now, there is a 10-15% of those contacts which are just garbage. And so you kind of have to go into it knowing that some of the contacts that you're going to get from the platforms are just going to be bad. And you just kind of consider that as like part of the cost of doing business there. You kind of just forget about those and then just focus on the serious ones.
All right, let me just have a quick look. The question there. Okay, I'll keep asking. Yeah, that's fine. There's my individual question. That's fine. Yeah, I'll ask the last question. If there's no other questions from the audience, is in terms of contents and the frequency of posting. Is there any sort of sum of rules you like to share?
So I think first, it depends with WeChat. It really depends if you have a subscription account versus a service account. If you have a service account, you're already limited to only 4 posts a month. So there's already limitations on how much you actually can post there. I will say, though, that's actually for good reason, because people, service accounts have the highest unsubscribe rates of any other type of account because they're so aggressive. When they post, it arrives on a student's phone the same way that a message from their mother would. And so the likelihood likelihood of getting unfollowed that is quite high, which is one of the reasons why we don't actually recommend many schools to use service accounts. That being said, in subscription accounts, just because you can post every day does not mean that you should. Generally, a maximum of once per week is sufficient. Sometimes, honestly, once per month is good enough. When most people are using WeChat as a yield tool, depending on sort of how much sort of resources you have. We do not recommend people spending tons of dollars in writing content that no one reads. And so if you're just getting started in China, we recommend just having that WeChat account, using very, very light engagement in terms of posting, not over posting, and then focusing as much as possible on running effective campaigns, driving up those leads, and then worrying about increasing your post frequency. So maybe on a WeChat, on a Weibo, you might start with once a week or once every 2 weeks. With WeChat, maybe once every 2 weeks, and then slowly increase that posting frequency as you have more people following you, as opposed to sort of thinking that you're going to get organic engagement. Because China's so big and because study abroad, while it's a huge community, China's just, it's a drop in the ocean of how many people there are in China, right? We might think, oh, hundreds of thousands of kids study abroad, but there's like over 1 billion people in China. So it's just such a drop in the ocean that you're not going to get organic engagement. People are almost never going to find you. You have to find them. And so as a result, it's always first start with campaigns, driving to platforms, later increase posting frequency is almost always the most effective way to go.
Okay. I think we come to the end of our seminar. Thank you very much, Gavin. Always have lots of insights, and yeah, even I've heard a similar topic before, but there's always something new to learn each time. So I hope all the audience find the talk have been useful, and feel free to get in touch, and particularly if you want to set up one-on-one meeting, and we can have Gavin or his colleague to join the conversation, address that issues that needed by your institution. Okay, and thank you everyone again, and enjoy the rest of your day. See you next CHE seminar.